Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep week 11 going with today's Tolkien Tuesday. Now, last week we looked at a lot of the reviews that had begun to come in for The Fellowship of the Ring, and how sales had exceeded expectations, cranking up demand for the next two volumes. But Tolkien was having trouble completing the appendices and his planned index, and that's where we're going to pick up this week. I want to start with letter number 144 to Naomi Mitchison. Now, we actually referenced this same letter 2 weeks ago on a whole different point, but it also contains some comments especially relevant to the work that Tolkien was trying to accomplish before the publication of The Return of the King. Now, she had asked several questions, and he replied, "I will try and answer your questions. I may say that they are very welcome. I like things worked out in detail myself, and answers provided to all reasonable questions. Your letter will, I hope, guide me in choosing the kind of information to be provided as promised in an appendix, and strengthen my hand with the publishers. Since the third volume will be rather slimmer than the second, events move quicker and less explanations are needed, there will, I believe, be a certain amount of room for such matter. My problem is not the difficulty of providing it, but of choosing from the massive material I have already composed." True that, Professor. Now, he points out that though he's long finished the story that is included in the third volume, in fact, years ago, he says, and has finished all revision, he then says, "In the meanwhile, I am giving what fragments of time I have to making compressed versions of such historical, ethnographical, and linguistic matter as can go in the appendix. If it will interest you, I will send you a copy, rather rough, of the matter dealing with languages and writing, peoples, and translation." Yes, please. I'll accept that. The rest of the letter to Ms. Mitchison is a fantastic read. It really is. But I want to stay focused on the appendices and index as much as possible for now. So let's move on to letter number 150 to Alan and Unwin. This is dated September 18th, 1954. He says, "I regret that I have not yet any copy to send in for the appendices. All I can say is that I will do my best to produce this before the end of the month. My trouble is indecision and conflicting advice in selection from the too abundant matter. I've spent much ineffectual time on the attempt to satisfy the unfortunate promises of," and here he references the point in the prologue of the Fellowship where he promises an index. So here's the thing. In September, he'd hoped to send something in by the end of the month. But then in Carpenter's biography, we read this. By January 1955, 2 months after the publication of the second volume, Tolkien had still not completed the appendices that were required so urgently. He had abandoned any hope of making an index of names, having found that the job would take too long. Freed of this burden, he completed more material during January and February, but he found the task maddeningly difficult. He had at one time planned to fill an entire specialist volume with details of the history and linguistics of his mythological peoples, and he had amassed a great deal of notes on these topics. But now he had to compress everything, for the publishers could only give him a short space at the end of the book. Well, that's a shame. I wonder if they regret that now. But even in March, by that point still, progress had been slow. On March 2nd, 1955, Rainer Unwin wrote, begging Tolkien to deliver what he had, or they would have to, quote, yield to the intense pressure that is accumulating and publish The Return of the King without all the additional material. 4 days later, on March 6th, Tolkien writes back in what is letter number 160. "I must accept your challenge. We must make do with what material I can produce by your return. I hope the map, which is really the most necessary, will be included. I now wish that no appendices had been promised, for I think their appearance in truncated and compressed form will satisfy nobody. Certainly not me. Clearly, from the appalling mass of letters I receive, not those people who like that kind of thing, astonishingly many. While those who enjoy the book as an heroic romance only and find unexplained vistas part of the literary effect will neglect the appendices very properly. I am not now at all sure that the tendency to treat the whole thing as a kind of vast game is really good. Certainly not for me, who find that kind of thing only too fatally attractive. It is, I suppose, a tribute to the curious effect that story has when based on very elaborate and detailed workings of geography, chronology, and language, that so many should clamor for sheer information or lore. But the demands such people make would again require a book at least the size of Volume 1. Or maybe the size of an entire shelf. I don't know, Professor. You tell me. Switching back to Carpenter's biography, we learned that it took until May 20th to get the final copy of the appendices to the printer. The last map, prepared by Christopher, who had worked for 24 hours nonstop to finish it, had been sent some weeks before, so now there should be no more delays. But there were. First, the chart of runes was printed wrongly, and Tolkien had to make corrections. Then other queries were raised by the printers and forwarded to Tolkien to be answered. But by this time, he had gone on holiday to Italy. Maybe that's where I should go when our book's about to be released. Well, next time, I won't be going there, trust me. Next time, we look at some of the reviews that came out once all 3 books had been published, along with, if there's time, something about the very first adaptation of Tolkien's works, one that many of you may not even know existed, and I'll be surprised if any of you have ever heard it. Now, before I wrap up, I wanted to remind you that the Patreon for Today's Tolkien Times will launch this Saturday, August 12th. Please consider supporting the show there. When you do, you're going to get a bunch of good stuff. Depends on what tier you choose, of course, but you can get an ad-free feed for the show. You can get to join a monthly hangout with me just for Today's Tolkien Times patrons. You could get priority for choosing readings and mailbag questions. You might even be able to get a patron-exclusive bonus weekly episode and free merch. So go to tolkientimes.com/Patreon right now to learn more and be ready to sign up on Saturday. There will be discounts and a special offer for folks who sign up during the next few weeks. Now, if you're not already listening to the Prancing Pony podcast, please consider giving it a go. More than 300 episodes, more than 7 million downloads, walking our way through the legendarium and learning more about the man himself through the biographies and the letters, just like I do here. Finally, join me again tomorrow on Today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow or subscribe in your podcast apps. Follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.